Hello and welcome to this week's episode of the Veg Grower Podcast. My name's Richard and I want to encourage and inspire you to grow more of your own food in whatever space you have available. And I do this by sharing exactly what's been going on in my own allotment, my own kitchen garden here in Littlehampton on the south coast of the UK. I've been growing my own for over 30 years now, but I still learn something new every single day. Now, coming up this week, you probably noticed this is quite a long podcast, and that's because I've got a really good interview with Mark, who's a beekeeper, all about beekeeping, which is something I really want to do. It's going to be a good one. In the meantime, of course, we have the latest from the allotment and the kitchen garden, which I didn't want you to miss out. So let's head down to the allotment and get this podcast started. Well, I'm down on the allotment and we've had a lot of rain this week, and yesterday I was looking at the ground and expecting it to be very, very sodden. It was so wet that when we walked underfoot, that water was just being squeezed out of the soil no matter where we stood. And that's what I was expecting here on the allotment, but actually when I've got down here it seems to have dried out quite nicely, which was rather pleasing. However, it is January on the allotment, and because I've got no big infrastructure jobs to do this year, I am continuing just concentrating on tidying up my problem areas. The area by the shed where I have my gooseberries, and I've managed to continue tidying that up to the point that I'm at the point that I would say I'm 99% finished. I stand and look at it right now and I think it's all done, but when I come back another day with fresh eyes, I'm probably going to see a few more things that need a bit of attention. But because I was pruning away at the brambles and there were some cherry trees that have also sprouted up in that area, they've been all cut down to ground level. Gave my gooseberries a bit of a prune, just pruning away some of those dead, disease damaged crossing branches, which should hopefully help us with fruit production this year. Feels good to really get that area more or less completed, because it's been such an area that's taken a lot of my attention over the last few weeks that I would like to move on further down through the allotment. I did move on a little bit further, just in front of my greenhouses. I have areas that they're not as bad actually in that area. A couple of years ago I laid down some weed suppressant membrane, and that seems to hold back the worst of it, but there was a few brambles and things that have popped up that I've just quickly removed. Now, this area I have placed some concrete pipes down that I used last year for growing squash, just filled up with compost and grew squash in those concrete pipes. This year that's going to be used for things like carrots and parsnips, so I was just making sure that they are ready to go. I reckon we're going to get some good carrots and parsnips out of those, and in fact it won't be long until we're starting to sow those, especially if we do it the right way. Now, talking of carrots and parsnips, I've actually harvested some of those from the beds today. Got my fork out and quickly dug up a few carrots and parsnips for our dinner, along with a few leeks. Now, leeks and parsnips, of course, are what you would expect to harvest at this time of year, are winter vegetables, and they are absolutely delicious, of course. But what surprised me is just how well the carrots are. By now, I would have expected the carrots to be hit a bit with frost or other problems like that, but thankfully they've not been too bad. None of our carrots seem damaged in any way. They are a little bit on the small side, but I don't worry about that. They'll still be absolutely fine to eat back at home. And in fact, a little bit later on, I have got the recipe that's going to use these carrots and parsnips in them, so keep listening for that. Now, because I have managed to complete the area that's been giving me a bit of a headache over the last few weeks, I'm hoping now that we can start moving on down through the allotment. I've already mentioned that. The areas that I need to concentrate on next is my raspberry bed. These are autumn raspberries. They all need pruning down to ground level, but then I'm just going to remove some of the weeds, get that all composted and add a load of compost ready for the growing season. And then, of course, the very top of my allotment, which is another problem area. There's been a problem for quite a while now. Now, the problem isn't so much on my side, and I've said this time and time again, it's because we're getting some pretty bad brambles come over from my neighbours. At the moment, I can see them, so I can cut them back down, and that's going to be the plan. We're going to cut them back down off my area as much as possible, and then we can hopefully try and do our best to put a fence up or something just to keep them off my side of the allotment. Really want somebody to take that allotment on and to start taking care of it. It would be so good, but I am surrounded by empty allotments. As I look around, I've got my neighbours who's been there for 30 odd years, but apart from that, everywhere else there are very few people actually working the allotment. Big shame. I know we've got waiting lists, so why aren't they in use? Now, before I head on home, one of the other things that I have been doing, because, as you've already heard, I'm talking to a beekeeper a little bit later on, I really would like the idea of keeping bees. And I've been just sort of trying to see if there's an area that I could keep bees here on the allotment. I don't know if my neighbours are going to like it, but I really like the idea of keeping bees. And I've identified an area that I think would be suitable around near my greenhouse. Is somewhere that doesn't get very much traffic, and I think it would be great to have them there. More on that a little bit later on, but I'm going to head on home now. In the meantime, let's find out what's been going on in the supporters club this week. Well, I'm going to keep this little advertisement section a little bit short this week. I think you know what to do. If you are enjoying this podcast, then please do rate and review on your podcast provider. It only takes you a few seconds, but it means the world to us. If you are enjoying this podcast, you want to help support the work that we do, keep this podcast running, then please consider becoming a member of the Veg Grower Podcast Supporters Club. For just £5 a month, you get access to extra behind-the-scenes podcasts that give you more of an idea what's going on here at the Veg Grower Podcast HQ. Added to that, once a month through the letterbox, you will also receive a copy of our mini newspaper, which includes quite a list of things that you could do throughout the month, chance to journal things down and make lists of things that you need to do, and it includes instructions on how to sow the seeds that are included. Usually you get 6 packs of seeds every single month that can be sown throughout that month. As an example of the seeds that we've sown over this last week, it's included mustard and rhubarb, some of my favourite things to grow from seed. Now, if that sounds like something you would be interested in, then please head to the veggrowerpodcast.co.uk to find out more and hopefully sign up. Right, back to the gardening. Well, I'm back here at home, and talking of sowing seeds here at home, not only have we been sowing those seeds with the Supporters Club, we have continued to sow a few more seeds. Include the list of seeds that AI say that we should be sowing every single day. So what I mean by that is I got AI to come up with a list for every day that we sow a type of vegetable or edible seed. This week we have sown basil, dill, cress, tatsoi, sunflower microgreens, sorrel, leaf celery and cutting celery, which is quite an impressive amount. I've got to admit, celery is usually sown around this time of year. One of the hardest plants to grow, but it certainly feels like it's one that we need to sow. Now, added to that, of course, we have been sowing some past seeds that have needed potting on. In particular, the chilies that we sown back in December. They have really outgrown the plug plant starters that I start them off with. Now, when I feel that they have outgrown the plug plants is when the roots are taking up all of the compost within the plug plants. That tells me they need to move on to a bigger pot. The trouble is, most of the pots that I can find are, in my opinion, bit too big. They're a bit of a massive jump up, but I managed to find some pots that are 5.4 centimetres wide, and these are from Amazon. They're square ones, which for me are perfect from going from that plug plant onto something a little bit bigger. They're just perfect, but they also don't take up a huge amount of room or use loads of compost, so they can still fit inside when we are starting to struggle for space. My heater mats that I've recently upgraded, my grow lights, my plug plants, they're all getting rather full with all these seedlings at the moment. I'm not complaining because we are doing pretty well with it all, but we are finding, or we certainly do think we're going to be needing more and more space in a not too distant future. However, that may be where the potting shed comes into play, when we can finally move out to the potting shed. Now, the other big job that we have really been tackling this week has been the elm tree that I spoke of last week. Last week we started cutting down the elm tree, and then my pole chainsaw, the chainsaw on the end of a pole, blew up. Flames came out of it. It meant that we couldn't go any further. And it was really annoying because I really want to get this elm tree taken down so I can move on. So what I ended up doing was actually ordering, and it arrived this week, a pole pruning set. This is basically a pair of secateurs or loppers on the end of a 2.5 metre pole with a saw as well, which I figured was going to be enough that we could reach the top. First of all, it arrived and I started using the loppers, just cutting off the bits that I could. And that actually worked quite well. The loppers on this are so sharp. It was absolutely amazing. It literally cut through most of the branches really easily. When it started getting a bit thicker, the saw came into place. We turned it around and just cut away again. The saw being sharp made all the difference. The trouble is, the branches right at the very top are still too high for this saw. We got a ladder out, but I didn't feel very safe working off a ladder to do this. So we sort of got as much as we could. If you think there were 3 major branches on this, we're now down to 2, and even that is being dramatically reduced. We've just got to figure a way of getting to the very top to get the last bits down. Then once that's down, the rest of the tree should be easy. It's the working at heights bit that I struggle with. I have to admit, I'm not very good with heights at the best of time. So I am extra cautious when it comes to working at height, and my fear is, of course, as we cut these branches, they fall down and they could end up injuring myself or my wife who's been helping me. It's been a bit of a concern. It's not very pleasant either. One of my cousins, he used to have his own gardening business, and he was cutting down a tree one day when a large branch landed on his head. He had all the appropriate PPE, his staff were there, but unfortunately this branch landed on his head and he was in hospital for quite a while and never fully recovered. And he had to end up closing down his gardening business because it just couldn't work. And it's scary how something that we take for granted, cutting down a tree, can cause a lot of damage. So I'm always extra cautious. I said last week that I wanted a professional to do it, but we just couldn't get a professional in to do it. So me and my wife are doing it very carefully. It's taken longer than I thought, but I would be much happier when this tree is down. Now, I have to admit, while we were cutting down this tree, I also let our 4 chickens roam around the garden. I've done a bit of investigation, and because I have under 50 chickens, I can still let them free range around the garden now. And I think they enjoyed it. They liked that bit of freedom. They liked that space. They certainly seemed to have fun out and about exploring a place. It's not something I've done for quite a while now because of all these chicken lockdowns that keep going on. But we let them out in the garden. They roamed around, they were eating the grass, scratching around the beds, looking for insects and things like that. So it was well worth doing while we were cutting this tree down. Well, that's what's been going on here in the kitchen garden this week. Now, I'm going to head on indoors and we're going to have this conversation about beekeeping. But in the meantime, let's find out what we've been cooking in the kitchen this week.
Chopping all the veggies, sizzle in the air. Chef Scott with the magic, smells are everywhere. Water starts to boil, onions hit the pan. Recipe of the week, let the feast begin. Cooking with Chef Scott, flavors come alive. Tune in every week for a tasty bite.
This week in the kitchen we have been making this delicious creamy garlic and herb root vegetable tray bake. This is absolutely delicious and really easy to make. You can find the recipe on the veggrowpodcast.co.uk. And I would describe this as being very similar to potato dauphinoise, but it uses a lot of other root vegetables. We actually had this to accompany our Sunday roast, but we also had some leftovers for tea tonight. And in both circumstances, it was absolutely delicious. Now, the key ingredient is, of course, the root vegetables, and I used a collection of potatoes, swedes, parsnips, carrots and onions, but you could use whatever root vegetables you have available. All I've done is I've peeled and sliced these and then layered them in a baking tray. Once they're all layered in the baking tray, I then, in a jug, mixed together some cream with a few cloves of garlic. I put in quite a bit of garlic for this, and some herbs. Now, the herbs I used were rosemary and thyme from the garden, which are just available at this time of year, but you can use any herbs that you might have. Then I poured this cream mixture over the vegetables, placed the baking tray in the oven and cooked for about an hour until the vegetables were nice and soft, and then I served, and it was absolutely delicious. Now, as an optional extra, you could also scatter over some cheese, which we actually did with the leftovers, and it really did add a bit more to it. So this recipe is really, really easy. Go give it a try. Please do share your pictures of how you get on with this. I'm really glad I made it. This is one of these recipes that I will always remember. Now, I am joined in the podding shed by Mark from Buzz Into Beekeeping. Now, I have known Mark for a couple of years. I've seen him on the rounds really trying to promote bees, and in particular his bee starter box. But my first question to Mark is, when did you start getting into bees?
So I've been sort of around beekeeping pretty much my whole life. My grandfather kept bees. And I grew up in Zimbabwe, so you might notice a bit of a weird accent going on. But so when I was growing up, he kept bees, and sort of on a sort of semi-commercial basis. It was part of one of the things that he did on the farm. And yeah, so we were kind of around bees and beekeeping and sort of processing honey and jarring it and all that sort of thing, and always having honey, real sort of proper honey for breakfast and that kind of thing. So beekeeping's always been around, but I hadn't kept bees myself until probably 5 years ago, something like that. And I then sort of got into it here in the UK, and was gifted a hive for a birthday, and then sort of threw myself in the deep end, if you like. So I've got this hive, right, I need to go and sort of get into it and get going. And then I realized that there's a fair bit to it, and sort of the first few steps of it getting into beekeeping, if you haven't really kind of thought about it before, there's a fair bit to sort of get in place and work out and understand what you're doing as you're going along, which is both daunting and quite a lot of fun as well. And so over the last few years, kind of got into beekeeping here and sort of learned a fair bit, and there's so much still to go really that I haven't learned yet, but I've learned, sort of got to a point where I'm quite confident beekeeping myself. At the moment, I've got a couple of hives in the garden here, and then some other hives on another place, another sort of allotment not far from where I am in Chelmsford in Essex. Yeah, so really enjoy it. Happy to talk about beekeeping to anybody who'll stand still long enough to let me sort of spout all this information at them. I absolutely love beekeeping, and I can and just want to sort of spread that. But one of the things I came across sort of a few years ago, just sort of reading around beekeeping, was sort of about the how many beekeepers we have in the UK. So as part of being a beekeeper, you're encouraged to register as a beekeeper. And we've got sort of 50,000 registered beekeepers in the UK at the moment, which I thought was great. And then I found out that in the 1950s, we had 80,000 registered beekeepers, obviously a lot more. So I dug in a bit deeper into sort of why less now. And I can't really explain why there are exactly sort of less now, but the good news is that we're actually on the increase again at the moment, which is great. But I'm kind of really keen to try and encourage more people to get into beekeeping for all sorts of reasons. Obviously, it's a fun hobby, and it's great, sort of way of spending time, get honey out of it, which is obviously why not. But also you're doing actually a real you're making a huge difference to sort of the ecology of your local area and helping, keep things going biodiversity wise. And wild bee colonies are under so much pressure from everything that we do with, new houses and farming and everything that we're doing. There's so much less opportunity for them. So the more beekeepers we have, the better. And so that's sort of why I've sort of come to set up Buzz into Beekeeping, sort of help people get into beekeeping.
Brilliant. I mean, you've answered a lot of the questions in that brief introductions already. But something about myself, I have been interested in beekeeping for quite a while. I've sampled your honey a couple of times. I absolutely love honey, and I really do want to keep bees. My biggest trouble, I think, is finding the right location. But let's take me at the moment. I've got no experience beekeeping. How do I start?
So the thing I recommend most people to do, like if you're interested at all and wanting to just sort of dip your toe in the water, is find someone local to you who is a beekeeper and offers beekeeping experiences. A lot of beekeepers do. And actually on the Buzz into Beekeeping website, I've got a growing list of places that offer beekeeping experiences. So what that is you'll go along and spend a couple of hours, 2 or 3 hours with a beekeeper. They will sort of explain how beekeeping works and what goes on and the different parts of the hive and the different bees that there are and all that sort of stuff. And then you'll get into a suit and we'll actually then open up the hive and get hands-on with the bees, which is the most incredible, exciting thing, ever. And when you first lift the lid off the hive and there's suddenly, 20,000 bees in the top box sitting there, going about their business, it's quite an incredible thing to see. So you'll do this experience with a beekeeper. They'll kind of show you everything and talk you through it. And that sort of, couple of hours will tell you whether beekeeping's for you or not. Most people really enjoy, are kind of fascinated by it and will kind of be interested to do it further. Maybe not get a hive themselves, but maybe get involved in their local club or, that sort of thing. So definitely first step, do an experience. That'll help you, make that choice as to, okay, this is something I want to take a bit further or maybe not. And it's not for everyone, and that's fair enough. And, there is obviously always the possibility of being stung, which is obviously not 99% of people aren't that keen on it. There is that aspect to it too. But so that's the first thing I say is do that first. And then from there, there's various things you can do.
Is it possible that anybody can just start beekeeping? They go on this course and they can straight away just go and start. They don't need licenses or anything like that.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, you can. You don't need to have a license or anything. I mean, I mentioned about being registered, a registered beekeeper. That is, that it's not a necessity to do it. So there will be people who are keeping bees who aren't necessarily registered. There are really lots of benefits to joining a local association is kind of one of the things I also recommend is the British Beekeeping Association look after sort of England and Wales. There is also a Welsh Beekeeping Association, a Scottish one, and a Northern Ireland one, Ulster Beekeeping Association. So those sort of governing bodies, they all kind of work together a bit in terms of education and sort of best practice and bee health and those sorts of things. And it's really is a fantastic system that we have in the UK. So in the BBKA has over 270 local associations all around the country. So wherever you are, there's one, maybe 2 or 3 close by that you could join. And by joining one of those, I think it's about £35 a year to join your local association. And you get then some insurances, but you also get loads of help and joining your local community of beekeepers. There's training, there's advice, there's mentoring. Other beekeepers are buying and selling equipment and bees and all sorts of things. So it's a real great thing to do is get involved in your sort of local association. But you don't need a license or sort of any sort of specific permissions or anything like that to keep bees. Anybody can do that.
I could go and get a beekeeper's kit and just set it up in my garden, and I'm not going to get in any legal troubles or anything like that. We can just go ahead and do it.
Yeah, no, there's no legal stuff on that at all. But I mean, by all means go and do that. And if you set up a hive in your garden, there is at the right time of year, there's a small chance that a swarm might move in, and then you know you have bees as well. But definitely before you do go down the route of getting the bees, I would definitely say, you know, go on that experience. Then the next step from there really is to do a bit of training. There's various courses available. Some sort of private beekeepers will do beekeeping courses. You can do the BBKA version, which is delivered by the local associations, and that covers everything that you would need to know about beekeeping. Things like where to put your hive, what sort of hive to get, what to do with the bees when they're there, what you're doing throughout the year, because obviously the bees do different things depending on the weather. So at the moment, in sort of deepest, darkest January, where the bees are tucked up nicely, warm in the middle of their hives, and they're not doing too much. And once the temperature will get sort of around sort of 10, 12 degrees for a day or two, then they'll start to fly and they'll start to go out and start looking for things and that kind of thing. So it's all weather dependent, but throughout the year, what you're doing changes, and the training will help you know what you should be doing.
Brilliant. Definitely get the training beforehand.
Yeah, definitely.
So when I've been thinking about keeping bees, I've been thinking about where I'm going to site the hive. And my garden's a reasonable size, but I wouldn't call it a huge garden. It's 250 square meters. I've got neighbours on all three sides.
Yeah.
The other place was my allotment, which I believe I can get permission from. But with regards to the size of the garden, the allotment, is there any considerations when it comes to the neighbours that we have to think about from your experience?
Yeah, no, definitely. So what the bees will do, the kind of the way they behave is wherever the hive is, they will then they will work out a flight path getting to and from the hive. The bees, obviously, they don't know that that's your garden. They don't know that's your neighbour's garden. They will just scatter. They will leave the hive and scatter to go and collect nectar and pollen and all those things. They will fly about a 3-mile radius from wherever the hive is. So it's a massive area that they do cover. Yeah, obviously, there's no control on where they go. But what you can do is position your hive in a quiet part of your garden. You don't want to have it sort of right near the back door or right next to a shed that you're in and out of all the time. So a quieter spot in your garden. Quite often next to a fence panel or something like that, it's quite a good spot. Because when the bees come out of the hive and they fly, ideally you want them to fly up before they fly out. So it's thinking about the flight path and where they'll come and go from, where the bigger trees are around your property or your neighbour's garden will sort of determine that. So just a quiet spot. You don't need a lot of space for the hive. You probably need 2 or 3 square meters. So not a load of space at all. And you can have it quite close to a fence or a wall. So it can be tucked away quite easily. Your size garden, I think you could probably put 2 or 3 in there quite easily. Having multiple hives with each other doesn't really matter. That's okay. You can have multiple colonies sort of all together. Sometimes you might notice if you're driving in the countryside, you might see like on a farmer's field, there might be like 15 or 20 hives all lined up next to each other. They as long as there's enough forage for them, they should be fine. But in the size of area that a colony will cover, there's plenty of forage for them in this country. Even places like sort of the Middle East and that, where there's nothing for miles, you still have beekeeping in places like that because they are able to find stuff. So so if you're in a town or a city, you might think, okay, it's sort of an urban area, the bees might not have much forage, but actually there's a lot, lots of little gardens and parks and rooftop stuff and trees and everything else. So they're very good at finding what they need. So that's it. So you don't need a huge amount of space, but just a quiet spot in your garden, and just to be aware of where the bees will fly in any direction.
Okay. What about upsetting the neighbours? So I've got chickens, I've got a dog. Adding bees to it feels like it might upset my neighbours.
Well, I mean, it's difficult, isn't it? Depends sort of what terms you are on with your neighbours. One of the things I should mention about the bees is when they leave the hive, they do scatter. So unless you're standing sort of within 5 meters of the hive, you don't really know it's there at all. It's not as if your garden's going to be overrun or your neighbour's garden's going to be overrun with bees all the time. The bees they fly quite a long way. And so, and yeah, like I said, unless you're standing pretty close to the hive, you won't know it's there. So in terms of dogs, kids, neighbors, unless the bees feel like they're being attacked or under sort of thing, then they're very defensive, but they're not aggressive. So they generally they're just there to protect their hive. So if you are poking around, if a kid goes down and pokes a stick in the front entrance, they'll probably get stung.
You are genuinely making me think where I can site a beehive now in my garden.
Yeah, no, you and even at the allotment as well. I mean, I have heard that some allotment associations don't allow bees. Some do. So if you do, then awesome. That's great. Again, just a quiet spot, and they should be fine. You could always put a fence panel, kind of put them behind a fence panel, for example, so they'll fly kind of into that and not sort of directly across at sort of head height. And yeah, just to sort of give them a little quiet corner, but you don't need lots of space. And because they fly so far, cover so much territory, you don't. I mean, not in this country, but I have seen sort of stuff online about people who keep bees on balconies, like in flats. So obviously that's not much space at all, and
So we've made the decision that we're going to get into beekeeping. What
Excellent.
do we need? What do we need?
Okay, so we've covered sort of a bit of experience and training and a bit of know-how. It'd be good to join the local association, and through there you can kind of get mentors and shadow people and learn more that way as well. Nothing like this, getting involved hands-on is the best way to do it. But you'd obviously need equipment, so a beehive, a suit to protect yourself from being stung, and then a few tools. So one tool's a smoker, is kind of the one that kind of everyone knows about. So when you are beekeeping, because I mentioned bees communicate with pheromones. So what you can do with a smoker is when you open up the hive, you can waft a bit of smoke into the hive with them, and it kind of diffuses the pheromones. So if the bees are starting to get agitated and they sort of releasing a sort of a defensive pheromone, say defend the colony type thing, the smoke sort of diffuses that and keeps them a bit calmer. Some people think that the smoke kind of puts them to sleep or does that kind of thing. It doesn't at all. It just kind of changes the atmosphere in there and diffuses them. So a smoker's one of the kind of key tools. The most important tool, though, for a beekeeper is something called a hive tool. So it's like it's a flat piece of metal, a bit like a chisel. It has there's various sort of designs to it, but one end has sort of a hook on it, and the other end has a sort of flat, sharpened chisel bit. And that's a really, really useful tool that we use in beekeeping. We use it for so many things. So even just kind of opening the hive and cracking the lid off, you might use the hive tool in there to crack it off. When you set up your hive, it will be a stack of wooden boxes. And once there's bees in there, they actually glue all these boxes together with something called propolis. And that's what they collect from trees as tree sap, and they bring it into the hive, and they use that almost like wallpaper to kind of cover the whole inside surface of the hive. It's for sort of antibacterial reasons and sort of plugging up any gaps and holes. And so they will then use this in the joins between the boxes. So when you're taking your hive apart to do an inspection, they'll be kind of stuck together. So this hive tool is what you'll use to lever the bits apart. And even the frames, which will fit inside the hive. So people might sort of have an idea in their mind of almost like, I suppose, coat hangers on a rack. There's all these frames inside the hive, and that's what the bees will build their comb on. When you're doing an inspection, you lift these frames out and be able to look for things like, check if the queen's there, you check if there are eggs and various things that you look for during an inspection. But to do that, you need to use your hive tool to then kind of lift these bits out. So a super useful bit of kit is the hive tool. And yeah, apart from that, there's not too much other kit you need. So it's hive suit, hive tool, smoker, and then the other useful thing is a feeder. So in the winter time, to make sure that the bees have enough food to get them through the winter, sometimes we feed the bees with like a fondant or fondant in the wintertime, but in the summertime, we sometimes feed them like a sugar syrup just to help with at certain times of the year. So for example, in June, there's something, I'm not sure if it's the same in gardening or not, but in beekeeping, they call it the June gap. And it's probably changing a bit with climate change and things, but there was kind of this sort of gap between spring and summer where there wasn't really much rain. and there wasn't much forage for the bees. So to help them get through that time when there's not much forage, then give them a bit of feed then sometimes. So through Buzz Into Beekeeping, I have together a starter pack, which is called BuzzBox. And in the BuzzBox starter pack, there are all of the bits that you need to start beekeeping. So it's all the bits that you actually need and not the kind of the bits that you might need at some point. You know, like with gardening, I'm sure, you know, you can go into a garden center and there are thousands of things that you could buy, and all of them are probably quite useful in a specific situation, but very few are essential. As a kind of way of trying to help people who are just starting out and just getting into beekeeping, making that initial decision around kit easier, sort of taking the anxiety around that away, and sort of saying like, well, here's all the bits you need. You know, you focus on getting some experience and training and learning about bees and beekeeping, but here's all the bits that you'd need to actually go about doing it once you're ready. So yeah, so the kit has, the BuzzBox has a hive which is made up of a brood box where the queen will live in the bottom, and then above that there's 2 boxes which are supers, and the supers are where the bees will store honey, and that's what you'll harvest honey from. And it's got a floor, the roof, it's got a queen excluder. So queen excluder, I mean, there's so many things, I'm just throwing things at you at the moment. But queen excluder is like a mesh that you put in above the brood box and below the supers, so that the queen can't get through the mesh. She's a bit bigger than the other bees. So it means the worker bees can get through and go up and down no problem, but the queen stays in the bottom box. And the reason we keep her in the bottom box is because we don't want her laying eggs in the frames where we want to harvest honey from. So her job in the hive is all about laying eggs, and so she'll be laying eggs wherever she can, and we just want to make sure she stays in the bottom.
Fantastic. And everything is included in the BuzzBox to get started.
It is, yeah. So everything apart from bees. So bees is different. So there's a few places that you can get bees. You can buy sort of what they call a nucleus colony, which would be sort of 5 frames of comb covered in bees with a queen, everything that you'd need to get going. Buy a nucleus colony. What you do, you'd get that nuke, you'd transfer those frames into your BuzzBox hive, and then over the next few weeks, that hive will then fill with bees as the queen's laying more eggs and the bees are hatching out and the colony's growing. It'll expand into your BuzzBox hive. So yeah, so nukes is one way to get bees. The other way I mentioned earlier is to set up your hive in your garden and hope. And in the sort of between sort of April, May, June, sometimes July is kind of swarming season, and you might actually get a swarm of bees move in. It's quite rare, but it does happen. That's kind of free bees, which is pretty cool. And then the other way to get bees would be through your association. If you join the local association, more often than not, someone in the club will have colony they don't need or colony they're selling, and you can get bees that way. So there's various ways to get colony of honeybees.
Now, you've mentioned swarms. What is a swarm? What causes a swarm?
Okay, yeah, like I think pretty much everyone's heard of swarm of bees, and I think, you know, unless you know, I think that people think that a swarm is just like a colony of bees that are sort of moving somewhere, and that's kind of true. But what it is, it's actually only half of a colony of bees moving somewhere. So in the wild, the way that bee colonies reproduce is, I mean, obviously within the colony, the queen lays eggs and populates the colony itself, but that's one colony on its own. The purpose, you know, bees as a kind of species want to have as many colonies as possible. So what they do is once the colony has gotten to a certain strength, sort of strong enough to withstand a swarm, what will happen is the worker bees will start to raise new queens, and they'll raise, you know, a dozen or half a dozen new queens. And just before these new queens hatch out, half of the bees will fly off with the existing queen, and they will swarm. So they fly off, and their goal is to start a new colony somewhere else. And what they've left behind is roughly half of the worker bees plus a handful of these new queens that are about to hatch. They will literally hatch like kind of the day after, pretty much. So the colony that's left behind, obviously it's got a nice place to live. It's got a sort of a hive, and it's all set up ready to go. The only thing it's missing is a queen. So then these new queens will hatch, and quite brutal actually. What happens is these new queens will actually hunt each other down in the hive, and they will fight to the death until there's just one left. So now you have a hive with one queen, which is great, although she's a virgin queen, so she can't lay eggs. So once she's then strong enough, after about a week or so, she will then go on a mating flight. So she will leave the colony, and she will fly off to mate with as many drones as she can. I think it's sort of anywhere between sort of 20 and 50 drones she'll mate with on this flight, and then she returns to the hive, and then sort of a week or so later she'll then start laying eggs, and that will be her entire existence, will be laying eggs. That's it. She doesn't, the only time she'll ever leave the hive is if that colony then decides to swarm, and they will take her off and swarm to a new place. But otherwise all she does is lay eggs. So she's looked after by the workers. They will feed her, they'll clean up after her, they'll completely look after her entirely. And we call her the queen, but really she's not in control of anything. The colony, as a collective, decide what's going to happen and what they're going to do and how they're going to behave. And if the queen's not doing as well as they want, they will raise new queens and kill her off.
So swarming is part of the natural beekeeper calendar, I guess.
It is, yeah. So swarming, yeah, and it's really weather dependent. So it can be sometimes a little bit early in the year, sometimes a bit later, but on average, it's sort of April through to sort of June, July time.
It's absolutely fascinating hearing about all these bees and the way they live. It really is. It really is.
Yeah, absolutely.
So how much work is actually involved in maintaining a bee hive?
What I normally say is about an hour a week through the summer for checking the hive. So the BBKA recommend that you inspect your bees once a week. So what would that means is getting into your suit and going down to the hive, taking the roof off, getting into the hive and checking the frames, and you're looking for things like main things you're checking for is to make sure that the queen is there and that she's laying eggs okay, and that the pattern that she's laying in is good. And then you're also looking and checking that your bees are healthy. So there are some diseases that bees can get, and some mites and parasites that come along sometimes as well. So you're continually just checking and making sure that the bees are healthy and happy and they've got everything that they need. Make sure they've got enough space, because in the wintertime they'll only be in one box in the bottom, but when it comes to spring and summertime, you'll be adding boxes on top, so more supers for them to have more space, because there's a lot more bees, more space for them to store honey. So yeah, so throughout the summer you're looking at probably at sort of an hour a colony. But what you'll find actually, I think, is you'll probably spend a bit longer than that, especially in the first few years, because it is so fascinating and you're looking into it, and it's a real great opportunity to see what they're doing close up and that kind of thing. So it might take you a bit longer, but once you kind of know what you're looking for and you kind of in the routine of it, a commercial beekeeper will spend about 2 minutes in a hive. They will open it up, quick look, they know what they're looking at, close it up, move on to the next one. Hobby beekeepers like us, we'd probably spend 20 minutes, half an hour. It does depend on sort of where the bees are and what they're doing. And if you open up and you see, oh crumbs, they're looking like they're going to swarm, then there's a few things that you can do to then go, right, you might want to try and stop them from swarming, or you might want to do something called a split, where you take half the bees out, put them into another hive, and then you kind of create an artificial swarm situation. So the bees think, we've swarmed, and then they don't want to swarm again, but then now you end up with 2 colonies. So then it's also a way that beekeepers, swarming is an opportunity for beekeepers to increase the number of colonies that you have without having to go out and buy another colony.
So making it more sustainable and self-sufficient at the same time.
Absolutely, yeah. So from that point of view, for sure. So it's always, if you have one colony and something happens, you're done. But if you have 2 or 3 colonies, you have options then, because you can split colonies to create more. And then, if it comes to autumn time and you're worried and you think, okay, well, I've got 3 colonies, but 2 of them aren't that strong, you can combine them together and to make one good, strong colony to get through the winter. And then, so there's so many options. That almost a drawback of beekeeping is if you ask a beekeeper, or a couple of beekeepers for an opinion on something, you probably get 4 or 5 answers back. And
that's the same with gardeners.
Oh, good. Okay, good. We're not weird then.
No.
So there's so many ways of skinning a cat really with beekeeping, and it's the kind of the fun part is going, right, well, these are all the things people are doing or recommending. I'm going to try A and B and see how it goes, and maybe next time I'll try C, or maybe B's the good way to do it, and I'll carry on with that. So it's a lot of kind of trial and error within sort of the confines of beekeeping.
Coming to the end of the questions that I've got is the important question: what are the real benefits of beekeeping that we're going to put all this effort in?
Yeah.
What we're going to be our rewards?
So honeybees in particular are sort of keystone species. So they are kind of the linchpin in the ecology of an area. So without bees, a lot less things will get pollinated. I mean, bees are not the only pollinators. Obviously, wasps and butterflies and everything. There's lots and lots of different pollinators, but honeybees in particular are quite prolific in what they do and how they do it. So without honeybees, there's the obvious one of like food. So like fruit and that kind of thing doesn't get pollinated as easily, but also things like hedgerows and trees and other things that get pollinated by bees, and they create habitats for other creatures. So that's why there's a knock-on effect with, if the bees go, then it has a detrimental effect, a ripple effect across everything else that we do. So they're super important from that point of view. And then obviously honey. So honey's such a good thing. Do a taste test. Compare the supermarket stuff to proper stuff, and the supermarket stuff might have a bit of honey in it somewhere, but it's mainly cornstarch and syrups and those sorts of things. It's not real honey. So yeah, all the benefits of eating local honey and things. So yeah, I mean, there's so many positive things about beekeeping, and even just the time that we as beekeepers spend. It's that kind of weekly routine thing. It's always changing. There's always lots to learn. It keeps you quite grounded. It's such a positive thing to do, in the world, rather than sitting there doom scrolling on your phone.
Yeah.
Pages. So
obviously, you mentioned honey, and I'm guessing there's also going to be beeswax and things that's produced too. Which
definitely,
be a big benefit for us.
Yeah, no, for sure. There's lots of hive products. So there's obviously honey's the big one. Wax you can use for all sorts of things. People making sort of cosmetics, lip balms, furniture polish and wax, all that sort of stuff. Some people harvest pollen. So the bees, obviously, when they come back in, you'll see they have these big pollen balls on their back legs, and you can put a little device on the entrance of your hive. So as the bees come through, it bumps the pollen off, and you can collect it in a tray. So there's lots of sort of medicinal purposes used for pollen, and even the propolis from the insides of the hive. So that can be harvested and used as well. So there's lots of medicinal stuff. I mean, honey's quite famously antiseptic. So like in sort of thousands of years ago, it's used on wounds to. In fact, I think some hospitals today still use honey on some wounds and things, just to keep them clean and that. So
fantastic. I mean, I guess you can probably make things like mead and stuff like that out of it as well.
Absolutely. Yeah, I've not done that myself, but yeah, you can make mead. Some people make a sparkling mead. So there's a company up in Northumberland that make a sparkling, almost like a champagne with mead, which is really nice. There's so much you can do.
So how much honey would an average hive produce throughout the year?
It's a little bit kind of how long's a piece of string, but people in the club the association I'm with, they reckon 100 pounds in weight per year is quite doable. So you're talking like probably 30-40 kilos of honey. Wow. So it's quite a lot of honey. Yeah, it depends on the colony. It depends how strong the colony are, how good the queen is, because she obviously is laying eggs, and she's going to determine how many bees there are. The more bees there are, the more they can collect. Depends a little bit too about what's in your area. So I live on the edge of Chelmsford, and in the farmers' fields not far from the house, some years they have oilseed rape, the yellow fields, and the bees love that. They absolutely go nuts for that. You can see them just making a beeline back and forth all day, just collecting from there. So that they produce quite a lot of honey when that's on, which is normally early in the year. But yeah, it is kind of a bit dependent, and but if you're, in terms of like the cost of getting going with beekeeping, if you're worried about the cost of that, you can offset it with honey sales or offering experiences and all those sorts of things. So it's one of those hobbies where it can pay for itself quite easily.
Fantastic. Now, if anybody wants to get in touch or find out more, how do they find you?
So the best way is through sort of Buzz Into Beekeeping. So on Instagram, Facebook, and the website. So it's Buzz Into Beekeeping, all words, .co.uk. And just feel free to reach out to me there. I answer. My email's mark@buzzintobeekeeping.co.uk. So if you want to get in touch with me that way, feel free.
Well, since that conversation, I have been non-stop looking into keeping bees myself. This is something I've wanted to do for a while. Lovely idea of fresh honey, and talking to Mark, there seems to be a lot of pros to doing it. If you've kept bees in your garden, in your allotment, please let me know your experience. And if anybody else is inspired to keep bees as well, please do let us know. Now, I'm going to add all the links to everything you need to know about Mark in the show notes, of course. But I am going to wrap this podcast up for tonight. We have gone on for long, so I won't go too much into the usual household stuff that I do at the end, but please do rate and review. If you've left a review over the last week, I will read it out next week. If you enjoyed this podcast, you want to help support the work that we do, then please consider becoming a member of the Veg Grower Podcast Supporters Club. Don't forget to follow us on social media. If you want to email me, it's richard@veggrowerpodcast.co.uk. And of course, you can head to our website, theveggrowerpodcast.co.uk, where you can leave a voicemail or leave a comment. I think I've done that in record time, but we are on for a very long podcast this week. Right, well, with that, I'm going to pack this one up. So until next time, please take care.